Hi there, I'm Tino Richardson. This is the second in a series of Photoshop tutorials designed specifically for digital painting. And right now I'm going to get straight into showing you the iris blur filter effect in Photoshop. And this effect is just prime. It simulates the same depth of field you'd get from a camera. Say if you'd turn down the aperture and you get that nice crispy look where the background's nice and blurry and the foreground's sharp and all that sort of thing. It's quite hard to replicate that in your illustrations when you're digitally painting, so that's why we need to use the iris blur filter effect. Thing is, the filters, every filter in the filter menu, they only work on one layer, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to duplicate every single layer. And I've just clicked the top layer, and I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to hold shift and click, and now that's selected every single layer. And I'm going to duplicate them all by pressing Ctrl J. They're all duplicated. And I'm going to merge the layers. So now we have one layer on top of all the other layers. That's just... it's just a 2D flattened version of every single layer. And that'll come in handy when we start to apply the filter, blur, iris blur effect. Let's check it out. Now, straight away we see this this dialogue here. We've got a couple of options over on the right, and we're seeing this circle which we can actually drag in and out of the image to increase or decrease the blur area. And what we're going to see is blur outside of the circle, just like an iris. And so if I pull that in, pull that out just a little bit so we see the Waldo character in there, but we see a little blur around the edges. You know, it's always the way with Photoshop filters. You always want to keep it nice and subtle. That's the difference between a, you know, an amateur or a pro illustration or you know, design. The more subtle you keep your effects, the better it's going to look, seriously. And if I just keep it around about there, that's looking kind of cool. That's adding a little bit of depth around the edges. Not so much you'd really notice it too much, because you don't want to have to notice it too much. Let's up the light bokeh. And the bokeh, if you don't know what bokeh is, it's that sort of look that you get when you turn down the focus on your camera and you get all sorts of pinpricks of light around the place. That's bokeh. And we can actually simulate that effect using the iris blur effect, which is really cool. It works on some images, doesn't work on others too well, but let's just turn that up and see what we get. We can turn up the range too, so we can actually tell it that we want the bokeh to turn up, you know, more frequently between more ranges of colors. See, the more I turn that up, the more we get this crazy kind of moonshine going on, which looks kind of cool in its own way, but it's a bit much. I could get that around about there, and then I could turn down the light bokeh just a little. So it's just a tiny little effect. You get this funny little glow on the left there. So yeah, we've got this already. We've got some blur around the edges and a tiny bit of bokeh around the edges, and that's good enough for me. I'm gonna click OK. I'm not sure if you can see it on your screen because of the limitations of YouTube's upload quality, but there is blur around the edges, and it's really creating a nice atmosphere, really some decent depth in that image. And that's the difference. Off, on. You see, off, there's no blur. On, there's a little bit of blur there. And yeah, it's really very subtle. Try it out for yourself and see how you like it. Again, another use for the iris blur filter is when you need to create real depth of field, because in this illustration, it's supposed to, you know, it's supposed to simulate the effect of blurring out towards the horizon. The horizon's supposed to blur away and look all, you know, out of focus. But there's really not that much depth happening here. It's, you know, it's all been drawn and tried to simulate it, but we need the iris blur. I hate to say it, we really do. We need that iris blur filter effect. First thing I'm going to do is do exactly what we did before. I'm going to duplicate every single layer. I'm going to click the top layer, hold shift, click the bottom layer. I'm going to duplicate those layers. Again, the shortcut for that was Control J. And then I'm going to right click and hit merge layers to create a single 2D layer. Merged image. And now we can apply that iris blur filter. Except, you know, that's the wrong kind of filter. We don't want an iris blur. We want that good old tilt shift effect. And that's where we can head on over to here to the tilt shift section on the right. And that'll enable the tilt shift, you know, mode instead of the iris mode. What we're seeing here is a bunch of lines. What it basically means is everything up in the top here between the dotted line and the straight bar, it's going to be blurred. Same thing with everything between this bar and this dotted line, it's going to be blurred. But everything in the middle is going to be sharp. So this basically simulates the same kind of effect you'd get from taking a picture with a toy camera. Top blurred, bottom blurred, but middle sharp. Makes it all look like a tiny Lego set. So the way we can modify this is just to drag these areas around. I'm going to drag this down a little bit. I'm actually going to click in the middle section here and define where I want my sharpness to be, because I want this area of the road to be really nice and sharp, but this section up here to be really, really blurred. Let's turn the blur all the way up, you know, quite a lot, so we can see a fair bit of difference. And we can tell whereabouts our blur is going to be applied to. See, there's a huge amount of blur coming off here. Let's chuck that down a little bit to around about there. Oh, yep, that horizon's coming up nice and blurry. Let's take that up a little bit more so we've got a bit of depth of field in the foreground as well. So remember, top blurring, bottom blurring, middle is really sharp. That seems to be working out really well. Let's turn this blur down a little bit. That's just a little bit too much. Keep it subtle, always. Turning the blur down. Oh, the horizon's looking really nice now. Let's say okay to that. And yeah, that's going to make a huge difference to the depth and feel of this image. It's again, it's subtle, but it works really well. Thing is that the signs are blurred as well, but they're clearly in the foreground. They're clearly in the same kind of depth space as this sharp road section here. So they shouldn't be blurred. What are we going to do about that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to add a mask to this layer, and we're going to mask out those signs so that they're sharp again. Remember that this one layer is just one big 2D image. So we can just, as long as that's selected, we can hit the mask, add layer mask button, and it's going to add a white rectangle here. Let's go get our brush. Make sure we've got black in there, and I'll show you what happens. We're just going to brush over the sign. Hey, it's just revealing itself. Just revealing itself nice and sharply there. And same for this other sign there. Nice and sharp. Oh, beautiful. That's looking good. And as we can see, where I brushed, it's added a sort of a couple of black dots. This means that the black that we've just brushed is going to be hidden from this layer, and all the white is shown. So it's basically masking out the blur from this layer and letting the rest of the layers show through the bottom, as we can see. Which is really cool. Masks are fantastic. I'll talk about them in a later tutorial, but I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Start using the iris blur filter a little bit more, and yeah, and just let me know what you come up with. Please add some comments to the bottom and you know, give me some feedback on what you'd like to see next up. And you can, as always, you can subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate that. You can also support me on Patreon, which is a nice little site for donating to content creators. And the more support I get from you guys, the more tutorials I can make, and the more I can really focus on what you guys are after. And also, as a side note, the track included in the background of this tutorial was a track named Rainy Days by Sharpside, and you can find him on SoundCloud. And also, for more tutorials, more free Photoshop brushes, more resources, more goodies, you can head on over to exploitcreative.com.au, or I'll just be releasing lots of free stuff, and you know, just for you guys. It's all free. It's for you. It's for you, man. You know, just enjoy it, man. It's all good, man. And thank you. You know, thank you for watching this video. Appreciate it.